just a moment. So hello, my name is Julie Robb. I'm the Community Relations Representative here at Ida Culver House Broadview. Before we get started on today's presentation, I would like to share just a little bit about Era Living Memory Care, which we offer a secure home-like environment at 2 of our Era Living communities, Ida Culver House Broadview, and that is in Northwest Seattle, and the Gardens at Town Square in Bellevue. Here at Ida Culver House Broadview, we recently just opened our memory care, which we call the Terrace, and that is consists of 44 brand new apartments that we have here. Both of these communities also offer independent and assisted living on the same campuses. If you're interested in learning a little bit more about our memory care program, you can visit our website, which is eraliving.com/memorycare. Now on to our main event. We're honored today to host David Troxel, who will be presenting on the Best Friends approach to dementia care. David Troxel has become internationally known for his writing and teachings on the fields of Alzheimer's disease and long-term care. He has co-authored with Virginia Bell 6 influential books and articles relating to dementia care, including his book, The Best Friends Approach to Dementia Care. So I am now going to stop sharing my screen and have David take over.
Well, thank you very much for that kind introduction, and it's great to be with all of you. I see a few familiar faces. I think we need to have a some kind of prize for those of you who've attended most of the workshops over the last couple of years. You're going to hear a few of my jokes and stories more than once, which is part of the cognitive test I guess I could arrange as the speaker. But it's just really a pleasure to be connected with the Pacific Northwest. I live in Sacramento, California, but I've shared on a couple of previous webinars that I have a lot of deep roots in the Northwest. I went to a little college called Whitman College in Walla Walla, Washington. My first roommate was from Bellevue, Washington, and really have spent some wonderful time up in the Northwest. I have worked in the field of Alzheimer's and dementia care for about 30 years now, hard to believe. My longtime collaborator and writing partner, Virginia Bell, who I've written 6 books with on this Best Friends approach. She's actually turning 100 years old June 30th. How about that? And she's still working. We are actually writing our 7th book together right now. She's co-chairing the Dementia Friendly Cities Initiative of Lexington, Kentucky. So it's been quite a journey, and good to be with you today. So today I'll be talking a bit about the Best Friends philosophy of dementia care, giving you some practical ideas. I'll try to move along at a good pace so we have time for questions and discussion. And as always, if we run a bit late, that's okay with me. If you need to do some more Q&A, or you can always reach me at davidtroxel@gmail.com. Again, thank you to my partners at Era Living. I've been honored to be kind of an educational consultant to the company, and I feel like you all have such a flair, such an enthusiasm and great energy around dementia care. And as I've shared with you in the past, a dear friend of mine who's a very famous geriatric psychiatrist in London has talked about how really, in so many ways, Alzheimer's disease care is about what she calls informed love, And I think, Julie, you and your team really represent that, which I so appreciate that. So let me get to work here and get my presentation up for you all here. All right. Oops, that's okay. Let's see if that's gonna. All right. Give me 1 second here to see why my presenter mode is not working here. Oh, let's see. Alrighty, hold on 1 second here, guys. Sorry about that. There we go. Sorry about that momentary panic. Why is it not going into the full screen mode? You know, after 2 years on Zoom, you think we'd have all the kinks worked out, but I guess not. So today we'll be talking again about the Best Friends approach to dementia care. I'm honored that Era Living has embraced this model of care. We'll talk about our introductions and welcome, which we've covered. I'll discuss this idea of socialization being the treatment for dementia. We'll talk about the Best Friends approach to dementia care, and then have some questions and discussions. Okay. Oops, here we go. So, you know, I sometimes ponder the impact of COVID just in terms of a public health perspective on thinking about Alzheimer's disease and dementia. And Alzheimer's disease has certainly been on the front burners for so many years now. We know that before COVID, it was the sixth leading cause of death in the US. I imagine it's fallen to seventh now, but it's the only one of the top 10 diseases that truly does not have an effective cure or impactful treatment. There are currently four kind of mainstream medicines that are given to people with dementia. There's a fifth that was approved recently, aducanumab, Aduhelm, which we've talked about in past webinars. But we don't really have an effective medicine right now. And so we have to look at other strategies for delivering good care to people with cognitive loss. And I think some of that comes from, as we've discussed again on previous webinars, this idea of creating a therapeutic environment, an environment that's healing. And we'll discuss that today. But in terms of just the broad public health aspects, my imagination was really captured by this February 2021 headline, front page story on the weekly journal Barron's, the weekly newspaper that is really designed for the stock market and investors. But I think it's so fascinating how they talk about Alzheimer's disease as the other pandemic, which I think is really, really insightful. Because we know that Alzheimer's disease and these other dementias are very costly. $305 billion rising to $1 trillion by 2050. Hard to even get those numbers around my head. The American Journal of Managed Healthcare, APHA, and the Alzheimer's Association. So we know this is an enormous public health problem. And I have to say, sometimes I'm a bit wistful thinking about all the money and effort that was put into, for obviously important reasons, the pandemic. It is so encouraging that we are now funding research for dementia in a very strong way. And let's hope we find some similar results. I was talking to a scientist the other day, a researcher who believes that we're going to see a lot of other applications from all the different vaccine work and all the science that has come out of the pandemic that might very well be good for other neurological conditions. Dr. Alzheimer, a few of you have been with me on these webinars series. I'm sure you've seen this picture before, but Dr. Alzheimer is the man who kind of started this whole thing off. He was a very prominent and well-regarded physician living in Germany in the late 1800s, early 1900s. And he was fascinated by what they would have called back then lunacy. What causes this aberrant behavior, this craziness, I guess if you would say, in people, particularly with elders? Is it something in the water? Is it witchcraft? Who knows what they would have thought that would be back then. But of course, he was a very progressive man. This was an era where the birth of psychiatry was coming to the world. And he believed that there was a link between the brain and behavior, which we now know is true. Now, I think what is really interesting as you look at history, and this was something that I have to confess I'm a little bit ashamed of. I had not known a lot about this man until a couple of years ago, Dr. Solomon Carter Fuller, who apparently was quite an important collaborator of Dr. Alzheimer. I don't quite know his whole story about how he ended up in Germany, but he did. And he was actually the first ever, he was an American citizen, the first ever African-American psychiatrist. And he actually worked as part of Dr. Alzheimer's team as a key member of the team studying the brain. He's often uncredited for his contribution, but I kind of take great pride in the fact that we actually had a US citizen working hand in hand with Dr. Alzheimer, and I'm working to do a more extensive presentation about his life. I think it's going to be a very interesting story to dig into. So the two of them doing their work, obviously, like any scientist, any researcher, you're looking for subjects, you're looking for people to study and to interact with. And of course, in this case, someone walked into Dr. Alzheimer's office. It was the husband of Augusta Deter. And it was only 1901, doesn't seem that long ago when we met her. She's not the first person, by the way, to ever have Alzheimer's disease. She would be what we call the first person ever described as having Alzheimer's. And in an odd twist of history, she was only 51. Today, we would call that a younger onset person with dementia. But she had all the classic things that we know happen when mother or grandmother begins to have dementia. She was having problems with everyday tasks, burning things on the stove. She was getting lost in familiar neighborhoods, having trouble with names, remembering her name. She had something called delusions, and a delusion is pretty common and very typical of Alzheimer's disease. A delusion is a fixed false idea. So I might think that you owe me $10,000, or think my neighbor moved the fence in overnight to steal my land, or again, someone stolen something from me. These delusions, her delusion apparently was that her husband was having multiple affairs with all the neighborhood ladies, and I guess he wasn't. She even tells Dr. Alzheimer, I have lost myself. So very poignant. And, when I look at her face, if we were all together in the room, we'd have a more extended conversation about this. But, this face certainly seems one of loss and loneliness and isolation, depression, malnutrition. It's hard to imagine she's only 51. She looks much older. And this face has often been kind of a touchstone for my own writing, my own work, as I think about dementia, because I think this face of dementia we still see today, maybe in some nursing homes, maybe in some home settings, this loss, this disconnection. But I'm going to put it out there that, my friends at Era Living, all of you who may be even at home as a caregiver, today we know so much more about the dementias, we know about quality of life, we know about good health care. I'm hoping that this doesn't have to be the face of dementia, that there's a lot we can do to lift the person up and have them really be at their very best. And a lot of this comes from the best friends philosophy that I'll be talking about again shortly. I always do like to kind of define my terms and again remind people about this word dementia. And I think I'll probably cover it in our next webinar or two, but there's actually some very interesting work going on now in the medical community with some different interest groups about if we might even just toss the name dementia out altogether. I don't like the word. I've met many people who have dementia who don't like the word. And we may go to something like, diseases causing cognitive loss, or some other phrases or languaging to kind of describe this. But for now, this is what the medical community talks about. And dementia is not a diagnosis in and of itself. So if the doctor says your mother has dementia, it's just not specific enough. I guess an analogy might be a doctor telling you you have cancer. Well, what kind of cancer? Where is it? What's going on? So dementia is that broad term. And underneath this dementia umbrella, you can see on the left are some things that are currently considered irreversible. Alzheimer's disease, which is about 60% of the dementias, vascular dementia. It's an oversimplification, but those mini strokes or interruption of blood flow to the brain. Some later language on that is vascular cognitive impairment. Mixed dementia, you can have more than one dementia actually going on. We now know there's a lot of interesting things happening within the brain, but classically mixed dementia, mixed dementia is Alzheimer's disease. Pardon me, my throat here. Classically, mixed dementia is Alzheimer's disease plus vascular. We have lots of allergies going in my town of Sacramento right now, so forgive my craggy voice. Frontal temporal dementia, very interesting, the only dementia that affects more men than women, peak age 55 to 65, and people with FTD often, even though there are a lot of variants, have great personality change before they have the cognitive loss. Lewy body dementia, a very distinctive dementia. It has often a lot of sort of similarities to Parkinson's, that movement disorder. People with Lewy body dementia classically have hallucination. They could be visual, they could be sounds, they could be smells. Sadly, I think many of you may remember the wonderful comedian Robin Williams, who took his own life. Later, the family revealed that he had actually been diagnosed with Lewy body dementia, which puts a kind of a new spin on maybe why he decided to end his life, not to mention the fact that sometimes the hallucinations can be so vivid, so real, they can be benign or they can be very frightening. And of course, Parkinson's dementia, I have to look up some statistics on this, but I think roughly a third of the people with Parkinson's will develop some dementia symptoms of confusion, memory loss, etc. And you can also have Parkinson's and Alzheimer's disease, but of course they are very, very different disease processes. With Parkinson's representing that shortage of dopamine in the brain. Potentially reversible causes: depression, normal pressure hydrocephalus, vitamin B12 deficiencies, infections, hormone issues, thyroid issues, medication interactions, malnutrition, lots of things that can be reversed. I've spoken in the past about depression on these webinar series. This is something that, again, is always on my mind, because There's actually research dating back to 1952 that people with long histories of untreated clinical depression are at greater risk for later life cognitive loss. And about 40% of people who have Alzheimer's disease, according to the Alzheimer's Association, about 40% will experience depression during their course of illness. Now, depression is something that I think you kind of know it when you see it. Many of you are family members. I think you probably understand that depression can be a big issue. You do want to get on top of that, either with medication, and the antidepressants aren't too bad in elders, or again with activity, engagement. I'm sure that Era Living, when they know that someone has depression, for example, we're going to be sure to get them outdoors as much as possible, give them productive activities to help them feel a sense of purpose and value and meaning, pet therapy, being with children, music. All of these things can also, conquer a depression as well. So Alzheimer's disease, I'm not going to take a lot of time discussing this because I think we all know what it is. As I said, it is the most common type of dementia, about 60% of the cases. The average course of illness is about 8 years, but this is a bit misleading because there are people who seem to crash through the phases of Alzheimer's disease in 3 or 4 years. There are people who live with this for 20 years. Key symptoms include short-term memory loss, confusion, and mistakes. Alzheimer's disease is a fatal illness, sadly, causing various complications. Because of the visual spatial aspects, you kind of lose that connection between the brain and the body with people with Alzheimer's disease. You're definitely more prone to falls. This is one reason why I know when I've been at the Era Living buildings, they have good lighting to kind of help, people not see shadows that they could fall on. There are other complications, infection. When you have incontinence, often that can lead to more UTIs, that can lead to sepsis. And recently I spoke to Dr. Jeffrey Cummings, who used to be the head of the UCLA Alzheimer's Center. Now he's at Cleveland Clinic in Las Vegas. He spoke at a conference a while back, and he actually said that aspiration pneumonia is the #1 cause of death for people living with Alzheimer's disease. So as a little sidebar in that, I'll just comment that I always encourage families or professionals on webinars evaluate mom's medications. I think people still often are on too many medications that aren't really necessary. You want to have the person with Alzheimer's disease, I think personally, on the minimal medications that they need, in terms of particularly the ones they have to swallow. And I think that's something, again, you should certainly discuss with your pharmacist or your physician as well. The 10 warning signs, again, we won't talk a lot about these today because they've been covered in past webinars, but I think they are very, very interesting. And this is apparently one of the top downloads from the Alzheimer's Association's website. So you can go on alz.org and see this list. But it's a good reminder about the subtleties and the complexities of Alzheimer's and these other dementias. Of course, #1 is the symptom that we most associate with Alzheimer's, memory loss that disrupts daily life. And I think that last phrase is important because I think many of us are worried about our memories. Where did I put my cell phone? Where are my car keys? I think life is very complicated now. We look at our phones for everything instead of trying to remember things. We're probably not using our memories. But of course, #1 is something very significant. Challenges in planning or solving problems. This is an important message for those of you who are family members. Sadly, Alzheimer's disease being a progressive illness, it does change our relationship with the person with dementia. You can't just carry on sort of business as normal. Mom, here are the 6 reasons why you need an in-home helper, and I have a PowerPoint ready to go and explain it to you. You can't be overly cognitive in your own approach to people with dementia. You've got to really focus a bit more on emotion. Difficulty completing familiar tasks. Again, maybe someone who's always a good cook is having trouble cooking now and following the steps. Confusion with time and place. Problems with visual images and spatial relationships. I see this all the time where someone will pick up a fork and they kind of miss their mouth. That brain-body disconnect. New problems in words, speaking, writing, misplacing things and losing the ability to retrace your steps. Decreased or poor judgment. Withdrawal from work and social activities, and changes in mood and personality. I guess the only other one that I always want to highlight is #8. Be aware, again, that people with dementia, no matter how smart they've been and careful they've been, for example, about money, they can make poor decisions. And certainly we see many cases where people with dementia fall prey to those bogus IRS phone calls or maybe they're even just using poor judgment and lending money to friends and neighbors where they shouldn't be doing that. So these are all things to be aware of. Again, with behaviors, we'll be talking more about this in future webinars. Everyone's a bit different. I do want to say that it's a myth that somehow people with Alzheimer's and dementia are violent or combative. I mean, it can happen, but we want to always look for triggers and understandings. But many people with dementia can be what I like to call pleasantly confused. They can stay in good cheer. So we want to ultimately look at each person as an individual and do this individual care plan focused on abilities and strengths. And sophisticated and progressive providers like Era Living will do that. They have a team that can come in and really try to hopefully tailor that individual care plan as well. Again, just a few more things on dementia, vascular dementia. I think we've covered this pretty well. I will say that with vascular dementia, I almost find that people kind of plateau for a period of time, then maybe go down a step, plateau for a period of time, go down a step. It's almost like kind of going down a set of stairs, versus Alzheimer's disease is kind of like a slow and lazy river. Lewy body, again, we've covered this pretty well, but again, Lewy body is something very important to be aware of. There are a couple more things about Lewy body I'll mention. People with Lewy body dementia, we don't quite know why, but they seem to be very sensitive to psychotropic meds. I'm not a big fan of psychotropic meds anyway, these psych drugs that are used for behavior. They can sometimes really save the day, some Seroquel, things like that can sometimes help if someone's behavior is scaring others or really disruptive. But I generally feel like hugs are better than drugs. And with Lewy body people, you want to be very judicious, and to use that old nursing phrase, start low and go slow. And frontal temporal, again, we've covered this, that sort of socially inappropriate behavior, impulsiveness, emotional indifference. One thing I will say, if you're working with someone with FTD, give them as much choice as possible, give them lots of praise, really help them feel in charge, compliment them, give them a job, give them something to do. And that can be kind of one strategy to kind of impact that personality as well. Again, this word dementia, I think we've covered this pretty well. It's that broad category. My favorite analogy that I really like to stress with families, because I think people understand it, is that dementia is kind of like the word soup. Okay, there's lots of soups. Every chicken noodle is a soup. Every mushroom's a soup, every tomato bisque is a soup, but not every soup is tomato bisque, right? So when you go to a restaurant and the waiter says, we have a great soup today, you say, waiter, what is the soup of the day? And they'll tell you. If your doctor says mother has dementia, it's kind of like the waiter saying we have soup. You want to say, doctor, what is the soup of the day? What kind of dementia? And again, I hope that kind of helps you kind of understand this. A little bit more on the healthcare aspects, and I promise we'll get to the best friends philosophy and talk more about this, but it's important to keep the person as healthy as possible. And this is something so important for you all to know, that sudden changes are not typically related to dementia. Again, that slow and lazy river of these progressive dementias. So you want to be aware of watching for sudden changes and recognize that, as Mike McLeod, a very distinguished geriatrician, says in Sacramento, works at UC Davis, recently retired, I think, Alzheimer's disease often comes with other treatable challenges that, left untreated, can worsen impairment. So again, you want to look for these treatable challenges. Real quick here, just a few of these inappropriate medications. I think it's very important, if you have a family member who's living by themselves, or for my friends at Era Living or other providers on the webinar, if you have somebody who's moving in, who has been living alone, be aware that they probably haven't been taking their pills very well. They haven't been eating very well, maybe hydrating well. They may be drinking alcohol, doing things like that we're aware of. So you want to really be aware that when someone moves in, maybe they're a bit rocky, they're not doing well behaviorally. I think just being given good health care, good food, a routine, getting their insulin under control, all of these things actually can really lift them up. It's quite impressive. Depression we've covered. Pain is something you really want to be aware of, because pain, particularly if someone has some very odd or challenging behavior that kind of comes on suddenly. You see, if I have a toothache, I could say, hey, I have a toothache, I need to go to a dentist. but a person with dementia might experience the pain and not be able to connect the dots and really be able to say what's happening. So again, a few of these we've covered. I'll just highlight a few here. Blood sugar, diabetes. There's been some very interesting research over the last decade or so, maybe 5 years particularly, about connection between uncontrolled diabetes, high blood sugar, and how that can damage cognition and even be a risk factor for getting Alzheimer's disease. You want to watch that. And of course, loneliness and isolation, very, very important. One phrase, like I kind of hope the Alzheimer's Association brings back, I think the conceptual piece of it is very strong. They talk about how what's good for the heart is good for the head. So be thinking about that as we go forward here as well. So again, just to kind of recap, you want to keep the person as healthy as possible, good food, pay attention to medications, make sure they're not on too many meds, monitor blood sugar, address pain and depression, good heart health. The current medicines I've recommended or talked about, the first four, Aricept, Exelon, and oops, I had that a little bit turned around. The first, look at number 1, 2, and 4. Aricept, Exelon, and Razidine are what they call cholinesterase inhibitors. They kind of give those neurotransmitters a boost. Those three are what a classic, kind of regimen is for someone who has Alzheimer's, particularly earlier stages. The doctor will put someone on one of those three and then eventually add Namenda. So Aricept, Exelon, Razidine plus Namenda is kind of the classic approach. Aduhelm was approved in 2021, aducanumab for early stage dementia. It has not been widely adopted at this point. It's been a very controversial drug. I will say that what's promising is that we finally have a new medicine in 2021 approved by the FDA, and I'm hoping more to come. It's going to be a very, very strong science year. I will just go off the chat for a minute, or off the slides for a minute, and just simply say that one thing you should put in your calendars is the big International Alzheimer's Association conference, the big research conference, I think is in July, the end of July in San Diego, the Alzheimer's Association International Conference, AAIC. And every year that tends to be truly a launching pad for a lot of important discoveries and updates from the drug companies, from universities, from other researchers. So be aware that probably late July, early August, you can Google, I don't have the exact dates, AAIC, there'll be a lot in the press about Alzheimer's disease. And one thing not in my slides that I'm hearing through kind of the rumor mill is we've talked for so many years about having a simpler diagnostic test for Alzheimer's disease, a blood test that might find those biomarkers. And I do think we might hear something big this summer about that, which would be very impressive. I went to a panel a couple of years ago sponsored by Genentech Roche, and they had good data saying that something like 60% of people are still diagnosed with Alzheimer's very late in their illness. And we need to do something better about that, because I think a lot of these new medications are going to be designed for early intervention, that if you can get someone on these medications early, it might push the disease back a little bit. Since we're all together right now, I still have a chunk of content to cover, but maybe we'll just do 3 or 4 minutes. Any questions or comments so far? And you're welcome to just put them in the chat room, or you can even hit your space bar and just speak out them as you wish. Any questions or comments so far?
David, I don't see anything in the chat yet.
All right, I'll pause another 30 seconds just to make sure no one has any questions, and there'll be still time at the end. Okay, we will go back to the presentation mode. So without, again, this magic pill for dementia, I like to say that the treatment for dementia is really you and me. It's about engagement, socialization, creating a therapeutic environment. And my very first book came out about 25 years ago called The Best Friends Approach to Alzheimer's Care. And it was the first book to sort of take a look at really how we give quality of life to the person, how we try to help them. And we argue that, having Alzheimer's or one of the other dementias is very tough. Again, you think about it, people are frustrated. They know they can't do the things they've always done. They're probably afraid and sad. They can be lonely and isolated. And so we argue that in many ways, what that person needs is a friend, a best friend, someone who can be there for them and kind of help lift them up and give them a quality of life through a number of ways. So it's really what I like to call kind of more of a social model, that we can do things to keep the person healthy, but we can't really touch their spirit without this idea of friendship and engagement. So I'll kind of build that case as we go forward. But there's actually, since I've written my book, a lot of evidence that's very interesting about kind of how our brains work. And ultimately, we believe that the brain loves company. And there's some fascinating research out there that people who have friends, people who are active in their communities, even people who have a husband, wife, or partner, people who are in community may get Alzheimer's disease later in life than people who are the loners. Now, again, don't panic if you're an introvert and don't really get out a lot. This is just risk factors I'm talking about, but it does appear that socialization and engagement are very therapeutic. A few of you may know my mother, Dorothy, passed away with Alzheimer's in 2008. She actually lived in memory care for 3 years. And it was very interesting because I think the power of her being with other people, having to leave her room and eat with other people and go to music programs and doing things like that, I do think it kind of supported her overall wellness, all right? Because again, with research, we know that in terms of lifestyle and friendship and being active in community, that exercise is very valuable. Exercise is one of the best things we think for maybe delaying the onset of Alzheimer's if you exercise regularly. And if you have Alzheimer's or other dementia and you move and you're active, all of that could be very good. Here's a picture of a famous Seattle man, Bill Gates, and then Warren Buffett playing bridge together. Again, maybe people with dementia can't play bridge anymore, but this sort of collegiality, this neighborliness, activity, I think kind of keeps those social muscles going. Music and singing in a choir. We know that music lives in a different part of the brain than words and language. And so I think music can be quite powerful. And many people with dementia, including my mom, would remember a lot of old songs. And then a little picture I got off the web on Elder Hostel, learning, active learning, again, can be very, very significant. And I love the fact that, in activities, even in Era Living, they'll often teach a class or have a discussion or talk about meaningful things, because I think learning is also very good for the brain. So when we think about friendship, friends do things together. They communicate, they text, they take a walk. I'm taking a walk with a friend later this afternoon. You go to a concert, you hang out with your children, you go to the dog run. And of course, some of those things might be hard to do from a memory care perspective, but in so many ways, this great day includes things like this. And these are all ideas I hope you can take to heart whatever care setting you're in. So purposeful chores. You might feel that maybe you need to do everything for mom or everything for your husband or wife or partner. But I think it's valuable if they want to help you fold the clothes or set the table or dry the dishes. We all have a need to be needed. So even if your spouse maybe doesn't dry the dishes the way they used to or organize things the way they do, I love the idea of purposeful chores. Learning and growth, I mentioned this earlier, teaching a class, talking about things, going into your life story. Maybe your family member grew up on a wheat farm in Walla Walla, Washington. So you can go on the internet and look at pictures of the old family farm or talk about family farming and watch videos of harvest seasons, things like that. Look at the new combines they have for all of that. Very, very interesting. A conversation. One thing we talk to staff a lot about is the importance of just even small engagement. I like to call it this old-fashioned word, chit chat. Talking about the color of someone's blouse, looking at the birds out the window, doing a small project, cleaning off a desk, doing things like that. I always have enjoyed, I've been in some buildings sometimes where they have artwork on the wall, and some buildings will kind of, nail them down because there are residents who will pick them up and move them around. But, in some cases, the paintings are just hanging on one nail. So I've even done things like go around with the resident and straighten out the pictures. So if there's something you can do with a family member, organize, a drawer, organize, get your forks and spoons and knives out and work on it together, go through old pictures, things like that can be very valuable. Life story work, I think Era Living excels as a best friends program. You want to know a lot about the person. I think it's great for families to try to write a little mini memoir, do a little top 10 card, all of this. Again, exercise, music, animals, and I can't stress enough being outdoors. I think being outside, particularly in the Northwest, is spiritual, it's sensory. And when you do have one of those rare sunny days in the Seattle area, when you have a nice sunny day, what's great is you get natural vitamin D. So again, you notice that I'm not saying that the treatment for Alzheimer's disease is heavily medical. It really is this, because you put this interesting day together, a day filled with friendship and connection, and lots of good things happen. Okay. So again, this idea of a best friends model, if I have a friend and we're meeting at Starbucks for coffee, and maybe my friend Julie says, David, forgive me, I'm not at my best. I have a migraine that's been kind of coming on the last few hours. Now, maybe during lunch or during my coffee break with Julie, she's kind of a bit snippy. She's irritable. Maybe she says something kind of snarky or not very nice to me, right? Well, perhaps I might be offended had I not have known that she has a migraine coming on. And you see, the fact that I know she has a migraine, I can empathize. The fact that she's not at her best puts me in a space where I'm very forgiving if she's a bit short-tempered with me, right? And I think that model of just sort of imagining sort of walking a mile in someone's shoes, I think is very powerful to know that it's the disease, not the person. So having empathy for the person. I remember 3-4 years ago, I was in Bakersfield, California, and one daughter said to me at a conference, David, my mother is just stubborn. She's deliberately spiteful. I feel my mother could do a lot more if she tried. Maybe I suppose people don't lose their personalities when they get dementia. But of course, my guess is that daughter just didn't have the empathy or understanding of the disease. If I had a broken arm, you could see the cast, right? But you can't really see a broken brain unless you're looking at a scan, right? So my guess is the daughter just needed to do a lot more work to understand that it wasn't really the mother being ornery and uncooperative and difficult. It was the fact that the mother has Alzheimer's causing a lot of this behavior. So again, think about friendship, our friends. Most of us display affection to our good friends. We're warm. We're happy to see them. We smile. Think about, being at the airport when you see those families holding the signs of people who are going down the escalator, coming out of the security area. There's just the happiness to see our friends. And this is something, again, that I think is very relevant in memory care, that when you have a best friends philosophy, we want to encourage staff to show this friendship. Life story. I know my friends pretty well. I know which friends I could throw a surprise party for, and I know which friends would never speak to me again if I threw a surprise party for them, right? We all are a bit different. So knowing life story work, staff and a wonderful memory care program know a lot about the residents, so they can get them their favorite hot chocolate with a marshmallow, talk about their nursing career at the University of Washington, talk to someone about, working for Boeing on the 747 jumbo jets, and again, kind of putting back the pieces of their memory the best we can. As I mentioned earlier, friends talk a lot, they communicate. And so we always want to encourage good communication, because sadly, the language centers of the brain are damaged by Alzheimer's disease and other dementia. So you want to learn some tricks around communication. We will, I think, be talking more about that in this webinar series. Creative problem solving. When you have friends and there's something going wrong, you can work with them to figure things out. I think a lot of dementia-related behavior has triggers. We can often be a good sleuth and figure things out and try to understand why things are going wrong. I mean, maybe not always, but I think often, particularly with people's life stories, we can figure out ways to redirect them when they are having behavioral issues. And of course, as I've already said, what do friends do? They hang out, they do things together. So this is all part of kind of this philosophy that, just like we are with our friends throughout our days, throughout our life, this idea that we should also be a best friend to the person living with cognitive loss can be very powerful. And in the books I've written, and I think Era Living probably has copies. If you haven't read the book, I bet they can lend you one or give you one. We talk about the ultimate goal as a caregiver is developing something called caregiving knack, K-N-A-C-K. And the knack is the art of doing difficult things with ease or clever strategies. So again, maybe we have a staff member who delivers the tuna melt to George, who ordered a tuna melt in memory care for lunch. The staff member delivers the tuna melt and George says, I didn't order that. I don't want that. And instead of saying, now, George, yes, you did. Look, here it is. I wrote it down. You ordered that tuna melt. you're wrong and I'm right. I mean, what's the point of doing that with somebody with cognitive loss, right? So if you have the knack, you say, oh, George, I'm so sorry. What would you like? And maybe you bring George something else. Or perhaps you just say, oh, let me see what the mix up is. And maybe you take it away and 10 minutes later you bring it back and he says, oh, great, what took you so long, right? So again, all of these things can be a factor again, but think about this idea of knack as humor and flexibility and patience, which is of course very hard. These are all ways we want to be with a person with dementia. So I just thought I'd share this one story from my days in Lexington, Kentucky. I worked at a very important day center there that's become a national model called Best Friends now. It used to be called Helping Hand. And Patricia was one of the participants at the day center. Now, she had damage to the language centers of her brain, and she would often kind of cry out. She would make these noises like, uh, louder than I'm doing it. Now, as you can imagine, it was a social adult day center. Some of the other participants who also had dementia were none too pleased about this sound. They would sometimes get cross and say, shut up, or what's wrong with her? And, began to be a bit disruptive. Now, a lesser program might have written or called Patricia's family and said, we love Patricia, but gosh, I'm so sorry. The noises, it's so disruptive. It really isn't working out. I don't think she can come to our day center anymore. But you see, when you have staff with a knack, when you have a good program philosophy, when you have kind of an educated workforce and you have a sense of what good dementia care is, you don't just give up that fast. All right. So we actually looked at Patricia's life story quite a bit. And we discovered that she'd actually been kind of a well-known folk artist. She'd done a lot of kind of beautiful kind of folk art pieces as a painter, doing watercolors. She was very faith-based, very active in her Baptist church, and she loved Christian music, right, and spiritual music. So we actually set up an art station for her with watercolors, paints, and pencils, and all this. And we also got her some headphones with her spiritual music. And we discovered that when she was doing her art, no vocalizations, no acting out. It was very interesting. When she listened to her music, no vocalizations. So we actually figured out a way for her to do well and be active in the program. So again, you can sometimes get up with those solutions. So, I like to think as we kind of wind down our talk today that, in some ways, I think dementia is sort of like being a tourist in a country where you don't speak the language, don't know the traditions or customs. If I get lost in downtown Tokyo and I can't speak the language and I don't have my cell phone with me, I might get kind of fearful and afraid and not know how to really approach people. And maybe no one speaks English around me. So if you kind of, again, think about that image, it helps me understand that when you do have behaviors, they're not necessarily aberrant or abnormal or craziness or however you want to phrase it. They're really what any of us would demonstrate if we had dementia, or in this case, if we were a tourist in the country. And one of my favorite quotes, I've used it several times during this series with Era Living, but I do admire, of course, Maya Angelou. Most of us do, I hope. But she wrote this very powerful quote, one of her most famous quotes, and it certainly was not about Alzheimer's disease care, but I think it's just perfect for what we're all doing here. People will forget what you said, people will forget what you did, but they'll never forget how you made them feel. So again, this idea of warmth and emotion, very, very powerful. And as we sort of tie this all together, I was thinking about some of my old people I worked with, and some of you may recognize this since you're all in Seattle, but this is the famous Empress Hotel in Victoria, British Columbia. So again, imagine, that maybe the retired hotel general manager moves into Era Living, for example. Well, what we do is with this best friends philosophy, think, well, how can we be a friend to this person? This distinguished, famous hotel manager who greeted heads of state and presidents and prime ministers and movie stars and celebrities, right? Well, we think, what would he have done? And maybe we make a list and we realize that he would love to have walked the grounds every day, inspect and approve menus, look at decorating, plan events, plan weddings, greet people. And you literally can do an individualized care plan where perhaps he becomes, in effect, the kind of informal general manager of the memory care neighborhood. He greets people. We give him a clipboard. We even type up a checklist for him so he can walk around every day and check things off his list. Maybe we even call him, good morning, hotel manager George or general manager George or good morning general manager. And again, this idea that you kind of customize things. We've had nurses in memory care where, again, we ask them to help us and give us advice and make the rounds and have a clipboard, and all of these then can be very, very important. So a few final things about communication that are all part of the best friends work I've done. Again, when we think about communication, just a few tips for you. You want to learn not to argue or correct. You know, if someone says President Eisenhower's in the White House, you say, I like Ike too, not what's wrong with you, he's dead. I give lots of compliments. When I do staff training, we talk a lot about this, but, you know, a compliment, how long does it take to do that? 30 seconds. How much money does it cost? Nothing is free. And when you say to someone, Dorothy, you look so beautiful in that pretty pink sweater today, I do think it's a very, very good technique. And I think something from the spirit, from the heart, to say that you love someone, you care about them, you value them, and it really does lift their spirits up. Asking for opinion, you know, do you like my new shirt or my new tie? Maybe there's a professor from the University of Washington in memory care. You can ask him about college education and college for your kids and favorite courses. Ask the professor, you know, Professor Marianne, I only did 2 years of college. Do you think it's too late for me to go back to school? What do you think I should study? When you ask somebody an opinion, it means you value them. Again, positive body language, smiles, slowing down, listening up, being affirming. You know, what would I do without you, Mom? You know, it's so good to be your friend. These affirming words. And then don't ask too many questions, because if you ask questions, they don't know the answers. It can cause that frustration. So again, just to tell you about, you know, again, kind of where I've landed is I do try to be authentic with people, and I try to be positive. I guess if my mom had said to me that about President Eisenhower being in the White House, I might have the first time tried to, you know, correct her gently, you know, hey, Mom, I know you really liked General Eisenhower, but, you know, we have a new president and his name is Joe Biden. Let me tell you about him. Again, I think they read your tone of voice. So if you're being conversational and maybe put a little humor in, they pick that up versus me saying now, no, 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 and that's not right. So again, one story I always think about is Marty, who I worked with him and his wife for many years in Santa Barbara. He had Lewy body dementia, and he had sort of a fascination. He had a fascinating hallucination where he actually saw 3 small children who he would talk to throughout the day. And I remember one time he said to me, David, do you see my friends? Now, years ago, we would have been, you know, taught to say, oh, yes, how look at them and tell me more about these wonderful children. But, you know, at a certain point, you want to also be authentic. So when Marty asked me these questions, I sort of took a deep breath. I said, you know, Marty, I'm so sorry. I don't see your friends, but I believe that you do. And again, that he was perfectly content with that. So you will develop your own rhythm, and obviously with your own family member, that can make a difference. When dementia behavior occurs, again, check the environment. Are there triggers? Or, you know, is the house cluttered? Is there glare coming in through the windows? Is there too much noise, too much activity going on? What time of day is something happening? Again, of course, be sure that there's a behavior, someone isn't ill or suddenly, you know, sudden change. Encourage them to do an activity they enjoy. You know, sometimes I'll get a call from a building around the country. Gosh, David, the resident won't do this, can't do this, won't do this, can't do this. And I'll sort of say, well, what do they do? Or is there something they do enjoy? And if there's 1 or 2 things your family member does like, I would double down, triple down, do more of those. Because again, why not? Why not? And of course, get on the same page with your family. If you have other siblings or family members, try to have a common strategy as you approach these behaviors. Can be very good. And in terms of help, I mean, I have a lot of confidence in my colleagues that are living. I'm sure they can help you with some ideas or brainstorming. I'm always happy to help out. And the Alzheimer's Association does have a 24-hour helpline with multiple languages. I'm sorry I don't have that phone number in my presentation, but they can get it for you at Era Living, or you can just Google it. But they have a 24-hour number with trained, I think even master's level social workers. Is really quite impressive. So as we get into the better weather of Seattle and spring and summer, just remember, you know, I like to kind of think about creating some summer or spring projects. So, you know, spend some time outdoors, maybe go to a concert, or, you know, have some evening concerts on your streaming television. Maybe do something for others, maybe bake some dog biscuits for local animal shelter, do some kits for the homeless people, do something for soldiers or first responders. Just have some fun. Write some nice appreciation cards to family members. Write some cards. learning together. Maybe just schedule a weekly class and pick a city around the world, and you can use YouTube and look at videos. And maybe you and your wife went to the Bahamas on your honeymoon, or Hawaii. Go back and look at the pictures, or go online and look at all the old wonderful videos and have some fun. Consider writing a little mini memoir, or even like a simple top 10 card about your family member. That can be so helpful if later they do go into memory care, or if your dad, for example, has to go into the ER, for you to share that with the hospital can be very, very effective. I found my grandmother's old recipe box the other day with all these cards that were handwritten in the 60s and 70s of all these old Jello molds and recipes. Go back in and explore old cookbooks, have some fun with that. And of course, Passover's coming, Easter's coming. Enjoy your times spiritually together. Enjoy some of those religious or spiritual traditions and rituals that can be very, very good. So again, thank you to Era Living for inviting me. I appreciate being a partner to you in this education program. And I think for all of you who have humor, flexibility, patience, smiles, who know our residents well, you're really wonderful heroes. And as Tom Kitwood, the late researcher, used to say, caregivers are really physicians of the human spirit. Again, as we think about kind of do's and don'ts, remember, try not to say, Mom, I told you not to do that, or George, that isn't your room. You want to say, Mom, let me help you. Teamwork. Hi, George, let me help you find your room. The hallway can be hard to navigate. I think some of this is also maybe even almost saving face, to use that old phrase, saving face, protecting someone's dignity. If they're going into the wrong room in memory care, just help them get to the right place, and be authentic. If someone's sad, you don't have to necessarily cheer them up all the time. You can just say, hey, I feel sad sometimes too. Let's talk. What's wrong? I'm happy to help. And maybe after you've cheered them up, you can have a little ice cream together and enjoy. So again, my advice or recommendations for all of you some of you may be new to this, learn all you can, join others in a support group or webinar. I always think, Alzheimer's and dementia are very slow and progressive situations. So don't wait to use services, plan ahead, and again, celebrate some of those successes. If you are interested in learning more about my work, I do have a website, bestfriendsapproach.com. And if you are on Facebook, you can type in the phrase Best Friends Approach and like the best friends. That can be very, very helpful as well. And of course, Era Living Memory Care as well. So thank you very much for letting me. I think I kind of covered the waterfront a bit today, but I am happy now to answer any additional questions or just have you share any stories or comments for me.
Thank you, David. Again, if you have questions, you can type them into the chat here, or you could just unmute yourself and ask.
Well, I know we have a number of family members. Let me just ask you, was today's workshop helpful? Did you get some ideas or some things that might be helpful for you going forward?
Yes, I did.
Thank you, Jill.
And I do have a question for you. What can you tell me is the type of dementia that would be induced through alcohol?
Yes, Jill, it's called Korsakoff's syndrome with a K. And basically, it's very interesting. A little bit of alcohol every day is actually good for the brain. There's research that a little bit of alcohol is fine. But people who've been heavy drinkers, it can be a risk factor for dementia. There's another problem, Jill. If someone has been a heavy drinker and they have blackouts, they fall and they hit their heads, and head injury can be very, very difficult. So if you Google Korsakoff's, there's some good material on that. It can cause that cognitive loss and damage. It can be a bit more like the vascular dementia. It can kind of be the plateaus, things like that, versus the slow river. Also, alcohol can lead as a risk factor to Alzheimer's. So it's a bit complicated, but certainly people who have been heavy drinkers, it does damage cognition.
Okay, thank you. That's helpful. If the person stops drinking, does it subside, or is this person still on a journey?
So Jill, I'm not an expert at Korsakoff's, but my understanding is the damage, sadly, often is not reversible.
That's what
I
I've
believe.
Heard.
If you stop drinking, that's very positive. So I mean, I think there's still, something to be said for that, of course.
Okay, it's a family member I'm currently dealing with right now. So.
Yeah.
Anyway, and I
And it is,
appreciate your bits about Walla Walla, because I went to college in Walla Walla as
oh,
well.
how about that? Great. I saw a question in the chat room about what to do if someone's driving and they shouldn't be. Tough question. You know, driving represents independence for all of us. A couple ideas I have for you real quick. I believe there is an Alzheimer's Association paper or fact sheet on driving and dementia. And I don't know if it's still there, but I think Metropolitan Life Insurance, MetLife, or AARP, seems to me several years ago might have collaborated and done a really nice kind of handout about how to talk to people about driving. Real quick, you know, I will say that early on in dementia, you know, having a diagnosis of Alzheimer's is not an automatic revocation of their driver's license, but many states require the doctor to, in effect, sort of report it to the DMV. And in California, where I live, for example, even a family member can report it to the DMV that someone has Alzheimer's, and they will call the person in to have an evaluation. And you can even do it anonymously, by the way. And what I like about that in a way is it's the state taking away the driver's license, not you. You know, as a caregiver, so often we become the bad guy. Try not to become the bad guy so you can blame it on the state. But otherwise, I would try to be authentic, share your concerns. If that isn't working, honestly, there are family members who disable the car, take away the car keys, say that the car is not working and cousin Bobby's taking care of it. That's a bit tricky because believe it or not, I've even heard of people going out and buying a new car. Maybe that's hard to do nowadays with no cars in the lots. But yeah, I mean, there is a lot of good stuff out there. And again, the Alzheimer Association 800 number probably has some good ideas for you as well. I don't mind staying a little bit later over our call. Any other questions or thoughts or comments?
Is it, hello?
Yeah.
Yes, hi.
Yeah, is it possible that that someone in an advanced state of Alzheimer's comprehends points you make, or just talking, yet doesn't give any indication of acknowledging or hearing or understanding?
What a great question. You know, I guess what I'd say is yes. But, you know, sadly, as dementia progresses, of course, they are losing so much of that skill to understand you and understand what's happening. I certainly always want to be with them and never assume that nobody's there, you know, so I don't like to talk about them in with their presence. You know, I try to assume that they are understanding me or, you know, just from a dignity perspective. What's interesting about dementia is that there are still, even in later stages, kind of good days and bad days. I'll never forget one time I was with someone who was really quite advanced, not really talking much, and somehow some subject came up and the person began reciting the Gettysburg Address. Like, good grief, how did that happen? You know, so I'd say if your family members in late dementia, there may be brief moments of insight, there may be good days and bad days. So I always want to treat them like there's still that person there beneath the cloak of dementia, even though probably late in the illness, they are missing much of what's happening. This is where tactile, you know, touch, smiles, music, you know, even sometimes the stuffed animal, real animal, all of that can be great. My mom, when she was, you know, nearing the end of her life and advancing dementia, I got a nice big straw hat for her, and we go sit outside, you know, just hold hands and you know, in the patio, and that's the kind of thing I think is very, very nice. When do you know when a person should be in professional care? Gary asked. I'll broaden that question, Gary. Like, when do you think you need some help, or assisted living or adult day centers? You know, every family's a bit different, or in-home care. Every family's a bit different. But a couple of things I look for is, number one is safety. You know, if the person's walking out the door at 2 a.m. in a snowstorm, or if they're being financially exploited, that's when you maybe need more care in the home or assisted living or more structure. So safety, socialization, you know, if you're just not able to create that spark and activity, because it's hard, you know, you're probably pretty tired if you're doing the main caregiving. So I think if you feel like the person's not getting enough enrichment or socialization, I want you to get some help. And I guess the third thing I'd say is really just to kind of, you know, have that plan, because a true story, I was actually in Prescott, Arizona yesterday, spelled Prescott, but they pronounce it Prescott, like the biscuit. And I met this man who was such a wonderful caregiver. But he said to me, David, my one goal is I have to outlive my wife. I have to outlive my wife, with dementia. And it kind of broke my heart a little bit. He was very, very focused on her care. And of course, I hope he does too, because his perception was that, if he dies first, who's going to really care for her, right? Well, guess what? It happens. He may not outlive his wife, right? So I was encouraging him to really try to be thinking out of the plans and, visiting facilities and communities and getting on waiting lists and maybe having a bit of in-home help. He was so determined to do it all himself, because that way, and of course, I don't mean to be melodramatic. What if he just had a small stroke or had a heart condition or had to go to the hospital for a week? He really didn't have a plan B. And I think because of dementia being progressive, you can have that plan B. Other questions or comments? Well, you asked some good ones. Thank you again. Certainly you can send an email to Era Living, or just, I don't mind, an email to davidtroxel@gmail.com. And I think we have another one of these scheduled coming up in another couple months, and look forward to being with you. We have I think a 5-part educational series this year, and I think this is just number 2. So look forward to getting to know you more. Again, blessings and thank you very much. And happy Easter or Passover or whatever your spiritual traditions are as we get closer to this season. Thank you.
Thank you very much, David. I appreciate your time. Again, we will be emailing this presentation that we have recorded out to everyone that RSVP'd. So you'll be able to have that link, and that'll be coming from Gearson. And if you have any questions for Gearson or I, or for Joan and her team at the Gardens, you can feel free to go ahead and reach out. I also do want to mention that the Gardens at Town Square does have some availability in their memory care if you would like to learn a little bit more about that. Joan and her team, Joan or Levy, excuse me, would be happy to help you with that. So again, David, thanks so much. We appreciate your time. And I hope everyone enjoys the warm weather we got coming our way. All right, thanks.